I need to tell you something before I begin. This is not a story about anger in the moment. This is a story about silence, about watching people smile at you for years while planning how to erase you in half an hour. I gave them 21 years of my life, and they gave me 30 minutes to disappear. They sat me down in a glass conference room at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. HR on my left, the CFO across the table, a legal folder already open, no small talk. No thank you, just one sentence. You can resign in the next 30 minutes, or we terminate you for cause. For a moment, I honestly thought I misheard them. 21 years. No warning, no performance issue, no written complaint, just 30 minutes. My hands were calm. That surprised me. Inside, something very old and very patient woke up. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I nodded. They thought they had won right there. Before I continue, let me say this quietly. You're watching Revenge Time X. If you've ever felt disposable after giving everything, stay with me. This isn't about rage. This is about leverage. I started at that company when I was 26. It was small back then. Barely 2 floors. No fancy titles. No stock talk. I was loyal in the boring ways. Late nights. Fixing mistakes that weren't mine. Training people who later became my bosses. I watched the company grow while my name stayed off the press releases. I was the one who knew where the bodies were buried. Not literal bodies. Processes. Emails. Verbal promises. I never threatened. Never complained. That made me invisible. Over the years, leadership changed. Founders left. Private equity came in. Everything became about optimization. I noticed the shift a year before they came for me. Suddenly, meetings I used to lead became meetings I was invited to observe. Decisions I used to sign off on went around me. Then came the documentation requests. Can you send us your process notes? Do you have the old vendor contracts? Can you forward that email chain from 2014? I sent everything, because I always did. What they didn't know was that I kept copies too, not because I was paranoid. Because in 21 years you learn one thing. Companies don't remember loyalty. They remember liability. The day they called me into that room, they slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Severance offer. $11,000. I almost laughed. That's what they thought 21 years was worth. Less than some people's annual bonus. The HR manager said it gently, like a nurse delivering bad news. If you resign now, this is what we can offer. The CFO added, otherwise we proceed with termination. Termination for what? They didn't say, because they couldn't. That was my first confirmation that they were bluffing. I asked one question. May I have a copy of my employment contract? The room shifted. They said they'd email it. I said I already had it. Their eyes flicked up for half a second. That was mistake number 1. You see, my contract was old. Very old. From before the acquisitions. Before the new legal templates. Back when they actually negotiated. Buried in that contract was a clause nobody had thought about in years. A change in control protection. Enhanced severance. Continuation of benefits. Bonus acceleration. They assumed I'd forgotten. They assumed wrong. But I didn't mention any of that. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue numbers. I looked at the clock. 23 minutes left. I said, I'll resign. Relief washed over their faces. HR smiled. The CFO leaned back. They handed me a blank resignation template. Just write something simple, they said. Effective immediately. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. Because this was the moment everything flipped. I didn't write a speech. I didn't accuse them of anything. I wrote 3 sentences. The second sentence is the one that changed everything. I hereby resign, effective immediately. Pursuant to Section 14B of my employment agreement dated March 3, 2003, due to constructive termination following material changes to my role, reporting structure and compensation authority. I slid the paper back. They didn't react at first. Then HR read it again. Then again. The CFO's face drained of color, because now it wasn't a resignation. It was a trigger. They asked me to step outside. I sat alone in the hallway for 11 minutes. No phone, no water, just a beige wall and a ticking clock. When they called me back in, the tone was different, very different. They said they needed to review language. They asked if I'd consider revising it. I said no. I stood up, shook hands, and walked out. No escort, no box, no goodbye email. That afternoon, my access was cut. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. It was their lawyer. Polite. Very polite. He said they had questions about my resignation. I said everything I needed to say was in writing. Then I waited. This part of the story isn't dramatic on the surface. It's emails, voicemails, calendar holds. But emotionally, it was the longest stretch of my life. Because now the fear had changed sides. They reviewed my contract. Then they reviewed their internal emails. Then they realized something worse. I had documentation. Years of it. Emails showing my responsibilities being stripped. Messages where leadership discussed replacing me quietly. Calendar invites where I was excluded from decisions I was contractually entitled to make. I didn't send them everything. I didn't need to. I sent enough. Their CFO stopped replying entirely. Their lawyer started calling every other day. Can we discuss a resolution? They offered $50,000. I said no. I wasn't negotiating emotionally. I was enforcing math. My contract plus labor law plus their paper trail equaled leverage. Months passed. They tried delay. They tried silence. They tried friendliness. I stayed calm, because revenge doesn't look like shouting. It looks like patience, eventually mediation. 3 people in a room who all knew the truth. Their final offer came quietly. $1.75 million. No admission of wrongdoing. Confidentiality. Clean break. I accepted. When the wire hit my account, I didn't celebrate. I sat on my bed and felt empty, not happy, not angry, just aware. 21 years reduced to a transaction. The CFO never spoke to me again. Their lawyer still checks in months later, making sure I'm doing well. I am, but not because of the money, because I didn't let them erase me in 30 minutes. If you've been pushed out, rushed, cornered, remember this. They count on panic. They count on shame. They count on you not knowing what you signed years ago. Sometimes revenge isn't about taking something from them. It's about not letting them take everything from you. I want to slow this part down, because this is where most people misunderstand what actually happened. People hear the number and think this was luck, or some clever trick, or a legal loophole. It wasn't. It was 21 years of quiet awareness finally becoming useful. After the settlement, I didn't disappear. I didn't move cities. I didn't buy anything dramatic. I woke up the next morning at the same time I always did. M. Out of habit, my body still thought I had somewhere to be. That was the first strange thing about winning. Your routine doesn't know you're free yet. I made coffee. Stood by the window. Watched people rush to jobs that would never love them back. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious. But I also didn't feel proud, because the real damage had already been done long before that meeting. I want to go back for a moment, not to the day they pushed me out, but to the years before that, because betrayal doesn't arrive suddenly. It leaks in slowly. About 5 years before the end, I stopped being invited to certain meetings. Nothing important, they said. Strategic realignments, efficiency changes. I told myself it was normal. Then my budget authority was reduced. Quietly, no announcement. I noticed approvals taking longer. Emails going unanswered. I adapted. That's what loyal people do. They adapt instead of question. Then came the new director, younger, confident, full of language like modernization and fresh perspective. He introduced himself by telling me how much he admired my tenure. That should have been the warning. He asked me to mentor him. I did. I explained systems no one else understood, shared historical decisions, explained why certain shortcuts had failed in the past. He took notes. Later I realized those notes weren't admiration. They were extraction. Over time, I watched him present my knowledge as his insight. I watched leadership nod. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him publicly, because I believed respect would return. It didn't. Instead, my role became symbolic, a title with no teeth. They didn't demote me on paper. They hollowed me out. That's what constructive termination really looks like. Not yelling, not firing, just slowly making you irrelevant until you leave on your own. And I almost did. There were nights I lay awake asking myself if I should resign quietly, take whatever dignity I had left and walk away. But something stopped me. Not anger. Documentation. Every time something changed, I saved it. Not dramatically. Not obsessively. Just calmly. Emails forwarded to a personal archive. Calendar changes exported. Job descriptions compared line by line. I didn't know I'd need it. I just knew something felt off. When they finally forced the issue with that 30-minute ultimatum, they assumed panic. They assumed gratitude for $11,000. They assumed I'd be embarrassed enough to comply. What they didn't understand was this. I had already mourned that job, years earlier. So when the lawyer started calling after my resignation, I wasn't shaken. He tried friendly first, just trying to understand your intent. I explained nothing. Then he tried concerned. We'd hate for this to become adversarial. I stayed quiet. Then he tried authority. Our interpretation of your contract differs. That's when I sent my first formal letter. Not long, not aggressive. Just precise, with dates, citations, attachments. Silence followed. 2 weeks. Then a new voice joined the calls. Outside counsel. Expensive. Careful. She asked if I was open to resolution. I asked what they believed they owed me. She paused. That pause told me everything. Because if they truly believed I was wrong, there would be no negotiation. What followed was not a fight. It was a slow acknowledgement of reality. They had violated my agreement. They had created a paper trail proving intent. They had underestimated someone who never raised his voice. During mediation, I didn't argue morality. I argued sequence. Event, response, contractual impact. They couldn't dispute facts, only consequences. The CFO didn't attend. That told me he already knew. When the final number was agreed upon, no one shook my hand. There were no apologies, just signatures. People ask me now if I feel victorious. That's the wrong word. I feel intact. They didn't get to rewrite my ending. That matters more than money. Since then, former co-workers have reached out quietly, asking how I did it, asking what they should watch for. I don't give speeches. I tell them 3 things. Read what you signed. Save what changes. Never assume loyalty is mutual. Some listen, some don't. A few months after the settlement, I ran into the CFO at a restaurant. Pure coincidence. He saw me, looked away. I didn't smile. I didn't confront him. I let him sit with it, because revenge doesn't always require interaction. Sometimes it's just existing freely while others replay their decisions. I still think about that day sometimes. The 30-minute clock, the blank resignation template, the confidence on their faces. They thought power lived in urgency. They were wrong. Power lived in preparation. If you're listening to this because something feels wrong at your job, because meetings have changed, because your authority is shrinking, because praise has turned into polite distance, pay attention. Not with fear, with clarity. Because the most dangerous thing to a system built on quiet exploitation is someone who stays calm and keeps records. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I wrote 1 sentence. And that sentence followed them longer than I ever did. The money is spent now. On time. On peace. On not waking up at 6:10 a.m. in a panic. What remains is something else. A quiet understanding. They tried to end my story for me. They failed. And if you've ever been pushed out, rushed, or cornered, remember this. You don't need revenge fueled by anger. You need patience fueled by truth. And sometimes that's enough to turn the tables completely. There is one part I haven't talked about yet. Because it's not the part people usually want to hear. The money, the contract, the legal victory. Those things scare companies. But what happened after scared them much more. At first I thought it was over. Settlement signed. Wire transferred. Silence. Then the fear started leaking out of them. Not loudly. Not publicly. In fragments. It began with small things. An email sent to me by mistake. Internal. Not meant for my eyes. A junior legal associate asking another, "Do we have confirmation he destroyed all copies?" Destroyed what? They never clarified. They didn't have to, because I understood immediately. They weren't afraid of what I had used. They were afraid of what I still might have. That's when I realized something unsettling. They didn't know the limits of my documentation. They didn't know what I'd kept, what I'd shared, or what I'd never mentioned. And that uncertainty started eating them alive. I hadn't threatened to expose anything. I hadn't hinted. But fear doesn't need threats. Fear grows in silence. A month later, their lawyer called again. Friendly tone. Too friendly. "Just doing a routine follow-up," he said. "Making sure everything is settled on your end." That's not a thing. Settlements don't need emotional check-ins. I told him everything was fine. He paused, then asked carefully, "You haven't experienced any issues since?" Issues. Such a vague word. I said no. Another pause. Then, "If you ever have questions or concerns, please reach out directly." I hung up knowing exactly what that was. They weren't checking on me. They were checking if I was quiet. From that point on, the signs multiplied. LinkedIn profile views from senior leadership. Repeatedly. Late at night, a former colleague texting me out of nowhere, asking casual questions about old projects. Whatever happened with that vendor audit from 2016? Did those files get archived? I answered politely, vaguely. I never volunteered information. Every response was just enough to keep them guessing. Because here's the truth they couldn't escape. They knew they had done more than push me out. They had discussed it, planned it, coordinated it, and they had done it in writing. People think corporations are cold and calculated. They are, but the people inside them are human. And humans panic when they realize their private conversations might not be private anymore. I heard later through someone who still worked there that a new internal policy had been rolled out. Strict document retention rules, mandatory training on internal communications, warnings about tone in emails. They never said my name. They didn't have to. I'd become a reference point, a quiet one. Executives started asking legal before sending routine emails. Meetings stopped being summarized in writing. Decisions that used to be casual suddenly required approval chains. The culture tightened, not because of me directly, but because I reminded them of something they hate remembering, that power leaves fingerprints. The most disturbing moment came 6 months later. Another call. Different lawyer, outside firm. Very calm. He asked if I'd be willing to sign an additional affirmation, a statement confirming I had disclosed all relevant materials during settlement. I asked why. He said, "It's just standard housekeeping." That was a lie. If it was standard, it would have been included already. I declined. Politely. The call ended quickly. After that, the call stopped. But the fear didn't, because now they were stuck. If they pushed, they'd draw attention. If they stayed silent, they'd imagine worst-case scenarios. And here's the part that unsettles people when I explain it. I didn't need to do anything. I didn't leak. I didn't post. I didn't warn anyone. Their own minds did the work. Every time a regulator asked a question, every time an audit came up, every time a whistleblower policy was mentioned, they wondered if it traced back to me. That kind of fear has no off switch. I once ran into a former HR manager who had been in that room with me. Same one who slid the severance paper across the table. She looked different, careful, like someone who measures every word now. We exchanged polite greetings. Then she said quietly, "That day was handled badly." I didn't respond. I didn't need closure. She needed absolution. I didn't give it. Because absolution is another thing companies expect for free. The most disturbing part isn't that they lost money. It's that they lost certainty. They will never know exactly how close they came to something worse. They will never know what I chose not to use. And they will never be able to recreate the version of events where I panicked, signed quietly, and vanished. That version was critical to their sense of control. I took it away with one sentence. That's the part that stays with them, not the payout. The reminder that even the quiet ones are watching. There is a special kind of fear that doesn't come from danger. It comes from not knowing what someone remembers, not knowing what still exists, not knowing when something buried might surface. That fear doesn't scream, it whispers, constantly. Months passed and I thought it might finally fade. It didn't. It evolved. I started hearing things indirectly, never from the top, always from the edges. A compliance officer suddenly retired early. An internal audit team was quietly expanded. An executive assistant deleted years of emails and was later questioned about it. None of this involved me directly. That was the disturbing part. They were reacting to the possibility of me. I hadn't filed complaints. I hadn't contacted regulators. I hadn't spoken publicly. But they knew I could. And once people realize you could, they start seeing threats everywhere. One evening, I received a message from someone I barely remembered. We had worked together 15 years ago. Different department. Friendly, but not close. The message was simple. "Hey, random question. Do you still have access to your old work files?" I stared at the screen for a long time. That question didn't come from curiosity. It came from fear traveling through unofficial channels. I replied with one word. No. It wasn't a lie. I didn't have access. I had copies. After that, the messages stopped. But the tension didn't. I began to notice something strange. My name was never spoken. Not in meetings. Not in policy updates. Not even in rumors. It was as if they had collectively agreed to erase the sound of it. Because naming something gives it shape. And they didn't want me to have shape. They wanted me to remain a shadow. Shadows are easier to fear. A year after I left, a former executive was quietly removed from his role. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. People whispered about strategic realignment. But I knew better. He had been copied on emails discussing my exit. Careless ones. The kind written by people who think loyalty will protect them. It didn't. I didn't cause his removal, but I had become part of the risk calculation, and companies don't tolerate risk with names attached. Another year passed. By then the money had settled into my life like background noise. Useful. Comfortable. But irrelevant to what was really happening. What mattered was this. They had learned something they couldn't unlearn. That someone they underestimated walked away prepared. That someone they tried to rush refused to panic. That someone they tried to erase had left marks everywhere. I once heard that a new executive asked during onboarding, "What happened with that long-term employee who left a few years back?" The room went quiet. Someone finally said, "It's better not to revisit that." That sentence stayed with me. Better not to revisit. Not because it was painful. Because it was dangerous. Dangerous to remember how quickly control can slip. How easily confidence turns into liability. How one calm person can expose an entire system's arrogance. The fear they live with now isn't of me personally. It's of the idea that there might be others like me. Quiet. Patient. Documenting. People who don't explode. People who don't threaten. People who wait. That's why the fear is disturbing. Because it has no face. No deadline. No resolution. They can't fire it. They can't settle with it. They can only adjust their behavior and hope it never returns. And I live my life knowing something they don't. I already moved on. I don't wake up thinking about them anymore. But they still wake up wondering if someone else is paying attention the way I did. That's the real reversal. They gave me 30 minutes to resign. Now they spend years being careful. Not because I demanded it, because I reminded them that power isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a person who keeps record, stays silent, and writes one sentence that never stops echoing. There is something else fear does when it has nowhere to go. It turns inward. I learned that when someone sent me a document they shouldn't have, no message, no explanation, just an attachment, an internal compliance memo, redacted but poorly. I knew immediately why it was sent to me. Not as a threat, not as a mistake, as a test. They wanted to see if I'd react, if I'd ask questions, if I'd acknowledge it, if I'd remind them I was still there. I didn't reply. That silence bothered them more than anger ever could, because silence forces imagination to work overtime. They started policing themselves. I know this because people told me. Off the record? Carefully. One former manager said, half joking, "Everyone double-checks emails now." Even jokes. Another said, "No one writes anything they wouldn't want read aloud." That's not culture. That's fear disguised as professionalism. And it doesn't come from policies. It comes from memory. They remembered how confident they were that morning, how routine it felt to give me 30 minutes, how ordinary cruelty had become, and how quickly that routine collapsed. The most disturbing moment came much later, almost 2 years after everything. I was at home when my phone rang. Blocked number. I almost ignored it. Almost. A voice I didn't recognize said my name. Slowly. Carefully. He said he was calling on behalf of the company. Not legal. Not HR. Risk management. That's when you know fear has reached its final form. He said they were doing a comprehensive historical review. He asked if I would be willing to clarify certain events from years ago, events unrelated to my departure. I asked if I was required to. He said no. I said then I wouldn't. The call ended in under 2 minutes. But the implication lingered. They weren't worried about me anymore. They were worried about themselves. About what else they had normalized. About how many people they'd treated the same way. About how many quiet exits might still be documented somewhere. I wasn't the danger. I was the precedent. And precedents are terrifying to organizations built on unchecked authority. From what I've heard, they still audit all decisions, still revise language, still caution executives about optics. Optics. That word tells you everything. They're not afraid of wrongdoing. They're afraid of being seen clearly. Sometimes late at night, I think about how easily this could have gone the other way. If I had panicked, if I had signed, if I had believed I was lucky to be offered anything at all, they would have slept fine. They would have moved on, and I would have carried the shame instead. That's the part no one talks about. Fear always has a direction. That day they expected it to flow into me. It didn't. It stayed with them, and it spread. Not because I chased them, because I didn't. Because I showed them something they can't fix with money or policy, that the people they dismiss the fastest are often the ones who know the most, and that sometimes the most unsettling revenge isn't exposure or punishment. It's making powerful people permanently aware of how fragile their control really is. They wanted me gone in 30 minutes. They got me gone. What they didn't expect was to keep me with them long after. Not in person. In memory. In hesitation. In every email drafted and deleted. In every meeting where someone asks quietly, "Should this be written down?" But that question is my shadow. And it follows them everywhere. The strange thing about fear is that it doesn't fade when the threat is gone. It reorganizes itself around memory. Years have passed now. Enough time that my access badge would have expired 10 times over. Enough time that new faces walk those hallways without knowing my name. But the systems remember. Policies still reference situations that happened before. Approval chains still hesitate where they didn't used to. Language is softer. Careful. Like someone walking through a house where something once broke loudly. I moved on in ways that don't look impressive. I consult a little. I read more. I sleep better. Sometimes I forget the sound of that conference room door closing behind me. But sometimes very late at night I remember something else. Not the money. Not the victory. The look on their faces when they realized the clock no longer mattered. That look wasn't anger. It was recognition. The recognition that they had misjudged the wrong person. I didn't take anything from them that day. I left something behind. A question. They will never know the full answer to it. They will never know how much I kept.